how much when you have, maybe a guy like Max, if we give him a chance to win, he's gonna win. How much of a motivating factor is that for you?
No, I mean that's absolute, like, it's probably one of the biggest things. Certainly in 2024, like I always felt that with Max, if you give him 90% of the car he needs, he'll find the rest.
What's up, Vegas?
Hello, Vegas.
How is everybody doing?
How are you doing? Are you feeling it? It's coming up, baby. It's coming up. We're getting closer. We're getting closer to this thing starting back up again.
I'm feeling inspired, Brian. I'm feeling inspired by Kendrick Lamar. He teaches the kids that if you hate hard enough, you can make it to the top. I'm feeling inspired. We're here to get inspired today.
You got to have that power unit inside you to keep things going and to pursue what you need. And sometimes that is driven by hate, and that is okay. And you know what? We have someone who has that fire in him.
Not necessarily hatred. Not necessarily petty hatred.
I don't know.
Although we'll figure that out. We'll figure that out.
We need to figure out what drives him, because he's got that drive. He was a little bit lost in his early life, as I found out reading his book. And then once he found it, he fucking found it. He pursued it full on. We have an author, mechanic, world record holder, let it be known, Netflix star, Red Bull senior power unit assembly technician. You might know him as F1 Mech, but he is Calum Nicholas. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Wow, what an intro. I try not to be powered by the same kind of hate as Kendrick, but yeah, you're right. It could be a very powerful fuel.
Well, he was powered. The irony is he was powered by like love and trying to uplift, and he was kind of relatively under the radar, and then he just started a petty squabble, and now he's a superstar, which is really inspiring to me.
I feel like he was dragged somewhere where he didn't want to go, so he was like, "Okay, let's go."
Yeah,
he's like, while we're here, I might as well just kind of do. We are recording this the day after the Super Bowl, so he's fresh on the mind. But
you're right, Calum. He looked totally miserable up there in the Super Bowl. He looked like he totally didn't want to be there. In his bell bottoms, grinning like a Cheshire cat. Anyway, enough about him. Let's talk about you. Okay, so we read your book. Very horrified to understand that you were an F1 casual. Not even.
I was. Yeah, do you know what? It was probably worse than that. Like, I was someone who didn't care at all. I pretty much just started even watching the sport when I decided that I'd quite like a career in it.
So you were a football guy, I'm assuming, or what drew your interest?
Yeah, do you know what? All sports as a kid, all sports. To be
except
honest,
for motorsport.
Yeah, motorsport was never really on my radar, but cars in general were. So, like, when I was younger, certainly when I was like 17, 18, I'd first started driving. I was sort of quite heavily involved in sort of the illegal street racing scene in the UK. And that was sort of where my interest in sort of racing was sparked. And I sort of managed to channel
were you like a Fast and Furious guy? Did you like those movies?
Yeah, in some ways, like empty industrial estates at 2 a.m.
Oh my God. So when you saw Lewis in Japan, you were like, that's what I used to do, like in a parking lot,
Yeah,
with
sure.
The clutch is like smoking. Yeah. So you liked driving cars, and you just became a regular mechanic, right? Like working on regular cars.
That's it, man. Like your everyday, school run wagons, fixing them, keeping them on the road, everyday cars for sure.
And what about that kind of hooked you? Because in your book, you talked kind of about like you were okay student, you would, if the teacher wasn't engaging you, you were like, why the fuck do I care here? Which I related to. That's how I felt. I needed something to like grab my attention. What about, working in that environment kind of hooked you?
I think it was more like an obvious physical challenge, like for me, like when I see something and I know how it should work and it's not working, and I like that physical challenge. So it was something that sort of, for me, every day it sort of presents a new challenge. And as much as I love doing sort of using my mind and whatever, as you can, I sat and wrote a book, but for me at that age, it was really about just getting stuck in. I used to love coming home every day, like covered up to my elbows in grease. You know, I really, really liked it. I really liked the nuts and bolts of it.
But you're also competitive because, you know, there's, you know, you talk in the book, it's like, you know, there was a guy, he was really smart, but he knew all this stuff. And then you have like your nemesis in the garage, your friend and healthy competitor. You would compete over who could fix, you know, Gladys's, you know, clutch from down the street, who could be quicker fixing the clutch. Like what, and you know, you're getting into street race. You say that kind of casually. Why did you need to compete with your friend at the car shop over like who could, you know, fix the clutch quickest?
Because my experience with the mechanics is it's not that. It's just like, oh, it's going to take weeks. It's going to take so long, hours of labor.
Like, you're paying by the hour, right?
Take a picture of your car because you're not going to remember what it looks like. It's going to be so long by the time you get it back.
Like, most mechanics will still do this, right? It doesn't matter. What you're getting charged is what it should take. But, you know, from my point of view, it doesn't really matter. Like, I'm going to charge you for 6 hours labor, but if I can do it in 4, then I'm going to do it in 4, and I'm going to spend 2 hours chilling out. But no, I think for me, from the competitive point of view, it was one of those things. Like I said, I was into all sports as a kid when I was in school. So it's something that I've always sort of been that way. Like anything I do, I will find a way to make it a competition. Like I race my daughter up the stairs to bed every night. Like everything, you know, there's always a way to make a competition out of something. Even if it's sort of mundane and boring, you can always find a way to make it more fun.
And what's your record against your daughter?
Oh, to be honest, she wins every time because it's not worth winning and having the tantrum right before bed.
Right.
You know, you gotta pick your battles. I like to pick my battles very carefully.
I see. Interesting.
Yeah. So you were pulling like a Lando Norris at the end of that sprint. Was like, I'll give you the win back. You get up to the finish line, then you let him cross. You know. Maybe
pretty much. I get like one step away, and I'm like, oh, my knee.
So you do one of those performative let her. She knows you could have beaten her. Does she know? You do like one of those performative like the number 2 drivers, like, here you go.
No, I tell you, and she does not care at all. All she cares about is the end result.
A win is a win.
A
win is a win.
She's just trying to rack up those championship points. Now, before I know, and for all the kids listening, you know, if you want to be an F1 mechanic, you actually have to go to school, which must suck to learn because it's like, I got to go to more school. But I want to know, when you were the mechanic at a garage and you got to learn every freaking car under the book that's like actually not designed to be taken apart all the time. When you like, how much do you think like a regular ass mechanic could understand in an F1 car?
Do you know what? I always said, for the most part, diagnosing and fixing problems on road cars is often way harder. F1 cars, you know, like I said, they're designed to be worked on. You know, they're designed with like speed and all your operations, like to get things like setup done. They're designed with all that in mind. So whilst sort of some of like the tolerances you're working to and, you know, the precision that you need to get parts assembled correctly might be slightly finer and slightly harder, in terms of the overall, I think you'll find that it's actually often an easier car to work on.
So what's the, like, what sets it apart then? Is it just, it's the schedule, it's the speed, is the kind of...
Yeah, I think there's all of those things, you know, like obviously the fact that you are in a massive competition, you know, that millions of people tune into, that adds obviously a great deal to the amount of pressure that you're under to get it done properly. Certainly, you know, things like pit stops stand out in that sense. You know, it's a huge amount of pressure that you're dealing with. And on top of that, it's just a really heavy schedule. So 24 races a year, you know, you're looking, if you cover all of those races plus some of the testing, you're looking at the best part of 200 days away from your family, from your friends. So it can, you know, some really long haul flights and triple headers that really, like, the physical and mental toll can be huge. So it's not necessarily that the actual work you're doing is, you know, exponentially more difficult. It's just that the circumstances under which you are working can be a lot tougher. This isn't a 9 to 5. You're not going home to your own bed every night. There's no such thing as overtime. You're there till it gets done, and you're there for the days that you're needed. So that's where it becomes such a more strenuous job. Not necessarily, if you're a qualified mechanic and you can understand an engineering drawing, then that side of the work isn't necessarily going to be what's testing you. It's going to be all of the other things that come with it.
And how fast do you think you could change a regular tire?
It kind of depends. I don't know. I'd like to say that I could get one swapped off and back on my car in under like 3 or 4 minutes if I had everything I needed.
Have you had that happen? Have you had a flat and you're like, I don't have any of my good shit with me? Like, this is a nightmare.
You know what? I have a flat and my car doesn't even have a spare tire. My car has one of those awful like canisters of foam that you're meant to like fill the tire with to get you to a tire shop.
Right.
Yeah.
So thankfully,
are you embarrassed like having to go into a mechanic shop, get some other guy to change your rear right?
No, do you know what? More than anything, I really can't be asked, and I can't find the time to work on my own car. I would sooner send it to a garage. Like, if it's not something that I can do on my driveway very easily, then I'm just going to pay someone else to do it.
Right.
Wow.
But when you get it back, do you judge
I'm
it
gonna
with
look. Absolutely. I'm going to look over every last bit of it.
Right.
That's like Brian's dad designs kitchens and their kitchen sucks because his dad doesn't like.
The fridge was broke. Our freezer was broken for like 2 years. My mother had shoulder surgery. It had no ice. We had to keep ice in the fridge in like the fruit drawers. And but my dad, because he wanted the perfect fridge. So we just had a broken fridge for years.
Fair enough. You know what? It's one of those things as well. Like, I think when you're a mechanic, you're more likely to look at something on your car and go, that'll be all right. Like, you know what I mean? You're so used to, what you can get away with for as long as possible. So it's a bit more, you're a bit more inclined to say, I'm a bit busy for that. It's going to be fine.
Well, I'm curious how much of that energy you can have in a F1 garage, because I'm curious like where that line is between, obviously, like there's a pursuit of perfection, but at some times does like perfection get in the way of good?
No, I think when you're in the F1 garage, you really can't have that attitude like at all. Like, it's an old thing of if you leave any opportunity for something to go wrong, it will go wrong. Like on an F1 car, if you say it will be fine, it won't. Especially, you put yourself in a position where you want to fight for championships. You really can't take any of those chances. What might cost you an hour's work to resolve right now will cost you a DNF and a load of points if you don't fix it by Sunday.
Right. But with the advent of the cost cap and like a limited, and I know with your job, it's engines, like a limited amount of engines, like, aren't you kind of making a calculation like, all right, do we want to take an engine penalty? Like, what are the chances this one's going to blow up? Like, do we need to replace this part? Do we need to replace, like, because this part's expensive? Like, could we get away with this suspension for one more race before we get a new one? Is there some of that game being played to try to save money in parts?
I think not really. I think R&D groups now, certainly, you look at pre-season when teams are designing and building a new car, R&D groups are under a lot of pressure to test components, knowing what mileage you can get out of them. So, more rigorous testing and sort of a mileage set for that part. And let's say you get to a point in the season where you're like, oh, well, perhaps we could eke out the mileage. There's a whole load of R&D to do on that part to ensure it's safe and usable before you could consider extending that mileage on a race car. So it's really not a case of going, we're a bit short of these, or perhaps we can just run this one again. Because it's not just about performance and race results. A lot of components on there, you're actually talking about safety. So there really is no margin for it.
So it's not like you look at the expiration date and you're like, well,
yeah, no, it's not like a pack of bacon where you go, no, that'll be all right. I can make a sandwich and that'll be okay. It's very much a case of, look, these are the set mileages because this is what we've set them to after we've tested them in those environments. If you want to then go and perhaps look at extending those, whether it be for cost or whatever, if you want to go and extend those, it does require the R&D to go with it. You really can't take chances with stuff like that. Like, as I said, it might just cost you a DNF, but realistically, you're talking about someone's safety. So there's really no margin for error.
Do you feel like sometimes you like? Are there any times where you kind of feel like I'm looking at this engine, it's good for more, you know what I mean? Like I don't care what the computer says, like I'm looking at it, it's strong. Like do you have that?
Yeah, I mean for the most part,
say?
like I kind of look at it and go, oh, I really don't want to have to build yet another new one. Can we try and run this one for one more race?
Right. I see.
There could be a bit of that. Like back in the past, I used to. So back when we were supplied by Renault, I used to name engines. And then obviously like your favorites, you'd sort of like look after them and go, yeah, this is a really good one. Like we had an engine back in 2018, I think it was 2017, 2018, that it had done really well. Like it had a few podiums, a race win. Like we were like, oh, this is, and I'd named it, and I'd actually named this engine in the engine was called Grace. I'd named it after my little sister. And Grace was brilliant, right? And it was all fine through the season. And then over the winter, it was on the dyno, and there was a bit of a numbers accident, like where ones should have been zeros and vice versa.
Okay.
And Grace like accidentally revved like through the roof to like 22,000 RPM. And now there are pieces of it still scattered around the dyno like years later. It didn't end well, and it was such a shame because it was like my favorite engine. It was really good, and I've never named engines since then. I felt like I couldn't take that kind of heartbreak anymore.
That heartbreak, and that was a tough era, the Renault.
It was the dark days.
So to have the one, the one good Renault engine, and then she's destroyed by a miscalculation.
And I want to talk to you about. I wanted to mention that to you as from an engine. From an engine mechanics point of view, how has your job changed? How has your workflow changed, your perspective changed from working on Renaults to Hondas to now you guys are making your own engines? Like your relationships with the French, the Japanese, and now I guess your own internal people? Like how does that?
Yeah, and look, the internal stuff and sort of Rebel powertrains in 2026, I haven't really got stuck into it yet. So I have a thing of, each year I get stuck into what I'm working on right now. Okay. So towards the end of this season, obviously people will start to get a bit more of an idea of how we're going to operate with powertrains. But in terms of between, look, and I talk about this in my book, between what we were used to with Renault and what we experienced with Honda, it was a very, very different work environment. I mean, like the Japanese are so disciplined in their operational procedures and like incredibly well organized, and like a lot of the time with Renault it just felt like it was just vibes, so it often was a lot more difficult for me to sort of plan my workload around them. Also, like I've become quite a lover of Japanese culture. Like all the Honda techs were like they're so cool. Like it seems like everything around the way their culture's built is sort of about respect and honesty and sort of passion and drive and pride. And all of these things have been like so sort of key to helping all of us sort of step up our game and deliver for these last few years.
Bankers, this episode is brought to you by BetMGM. Come see what's new at BetMGM. Score bigger when you win with boost tokens, odd boost tokens, and more. Even if your bet doesn't hit, we've got you covered with no sweat tokens. And that's not all. Sign up with BetMGM today, and you'll have access to countless betting options, including new look, same-game parlays, teasers, live bets, and so much more. Take advantage of these offerings and be sure to use the bonus code DADDY when signing up with BetMGM. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY for New York. Call 1-800-327-5050 for Massachusetts. 21 and over. Please gamble responsibly. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP for Arizona. 1-800-BETS-OFF for Iowa. 1-800-981-0023 for Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only. Subject to eligibility requirements. Bonus bets are non-withdrawable in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Do you, I know that sometimes if you're like a chef at like a top restaurant or something, they'll send like their chefs to like a school to learn certain recipes, or if like you work under like an umbrella, they'll be like, all right, you're going to go away for 2 weeks. You're going to go learn. Was there any of that? Like, coming into Honda, it's like, all right, you guys, we're going to go to Japan. We're going to teach you this engine or whatever. Or do they come to you? Like, how did that process work?
Yeah, I mean, right at the beginning, we did a fair bit where we had technicians over in Japan in Sakura sort of understanding the way that Honda want to run their engine and sort of feedback on the way that we were operationally as a race team. And sort of in the lead up to 2019, we sort of worked on all of these things together so that by the time we got there to that season, podium with the first race with that engine in Australia in 2019, it was sort of, it was a great way for us to sort of start the relationship by sort of being over there and understanding them, feeding back. And the same that, there were plenty of Honda technicians over in Milton Keynes sort of understanding how we run the car and what we wanted from the power unit.
And they started at AlphaTauri. Were you like at Red Bull? Like, were the AlphaTauri engine mechanics coming to you, being like, "Dude, these Honda guys are like"? Was there any sort of, or you can't really talk about that?
No, to be fair, it was one of those things. Obviously, during that season, we were split on suppliers, so there wasn't like personnel from one garage and the other because everyone's got to protect their intellectual property and things like that. But I think that we first started to hear whispers that sort of they were really happy with it all in the, what was it, the Toro Rosso or the AlphaTauri at the time.
Yeah.
So I think we went into that 2019 season sort of full of sort of high hopes and expectations that we could make the relationship work.
And when do you know you have a good engine? When you put it on the dyno, like, and or the noise that it makes? Can you tell? Could you tell you have a good one? Like, when did you know that the Hondas hit different?
Well, the Honda sounds different, right? So it sounds different to all the V6s. Certainly off throttle and things like that, it's got like a really distinctive noise. In terms of when you know you're going to be good, it's one of those things you talk to the engineers that have been running on the dyno and they'll sort of give you an idea. And more than what they say, you try and judge by their faces and just how they say it to try and sort of get an idea of where you're really at. But I think it's one of those things even when you're optimistic, you want to try and sort of, temper any expectations just to see where your competitors are at. But, it's one of those things, I guess it's like Q1, Q2 in that first race of the season when you're like, okay, we could have a good car here and we could be in with a shout.
What set, this question might veer into that you might be starting to speak a different language and it might be tough for me, but I'm curious, what sets the Honda engine apart? I heard it wasn't it smaller, is like smaller than like the Mercedes engine, or what was it about the Honda engine? What's different?
Well, I mean, the packaging is very good. I mean, what initially set it apart from the Renault PU was having the split turbo. So, with the MGUH in the middle of the V with, the compressor and exhaust housings at either end of the PU, that was a big change for you. Obviously, that allows you to lay out sort of your gearbox and your cooling systems differently. So from a packaging point of view, it was really, really good. In terms of the rest of it, I've got to say, operationally, it just seems like Honda were really receptive. Like it was more like a works partnership for us. Like when you're a supplier, ultimately that supplier's supplying multiple teams. You're sort of at their behest. The way they want to do it is the way that you have to then sort of conform to. With Honda, it was very much a two-way street. It was very much like a works relationship where we could say, look, we need this. Can you give us this? And it was a lot more sort of collaborative. But in terms of the engine itself and what sort of separates it, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of things inside it that Honda will keep as their own intellectual property. But for me, certainly the biggest difference that I noticed when we switched to Honda was the sort of the way we could package things. And things like the way it managed heat and all the heat shields that go around it, and all of that sort of shapes how you have to build your car.
All right, so enough of the Honda's performance.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your performance. So you get out of this race mechanic school. You spent some time in was it LMPs or GT?
I mean, my very first proper job out of college was doing GP3, so what we now call FIA F3. As a number two mechanic, well, originally as an apprentice and then as a number two mechanic. And I spent a couple of years sort of just really understanding, how a race team operates and sort of the general work that you do across a race weekend and how to run a car. And then during that period, the team that I was working at did a joint project with Level 5 Motorsport to run an LMP2 car at Le Mans. Now, I don't know how much you know about Level 5 Motorsport. It's quite an interesting story that I briefly touch on in my book. But for me, it was sort of the opportunity to go and do Le Mans and experience another type of racing.
Yeah, instead of changing tires, you change people. You just
exactly. Yeah, that was one of my roles in the pit crew, was doing driver change. But I got to be honest, and I did say this. I think that I don't know if I'd be able to do that now, like all 100 kilos of me. As a slim 20-year-old, it was fine. I was in and out of there. You wouldn't believe it.
Yeah. You went from there, and then you started, sending out CV. You're set. You had that. I talked about this in the intro, but like, reading your book, like you really, you didn't wait for someone to come find you. You like went out and pursued it full on.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a bit of both. So my very first F1 job was someone who was essentially looking for a role that they wanted to fill, and someone that I'd been working with recommended me for the role. But when Marussia collapsed at the end of 2014, and I'd spent 2 years in the paddock, loved what I was doing, and now I was like, shit, man, I got to find another job if I'm going to stay in F1. And then you're right, mate. I was frantically sending emails, CVs everywhere I could, just looking for any opportunity. And I was really, at that point, I would have literally taken any F1 job that was available, just to stay in the sport. And it's sort of advice that I give to people now. If there's an opportunity that you can go and take right now and get your foot in the door, say yes, get your foot in the door, and then work it out when you're there.
Mm. But and when you got into F1, when you got to Marussia, like, did it just click? It was like, this is like finally scratching this itch that I've been trying to get to my whole life. Was that kind of the vibe?
I think it sort of felt like that. Like I got my first F1 role and I was like, yes, finally I'm getting to F1. And then, I mean, don't get me wrong, there was some amazing times at Marussia and it was really like important for me as a time of learning. But, it didn't last. And I think I was at that point, I was a bit disillusioned, like we had no money at the team, like we were literally scraping the barrel, trying to pay wages every month. So for me to be sort of like, I was in F1 and then to later discover Red Bull Racing and be like, so this is really F1, like it was at the time I thought, this is F1 and everything's going to be great. And it was really disappointing when that all sort of came to an end. And then when I sort of started again and I went into that huge campus in Milton Keynes and saw really, what a championship winning team looked like, it was sort of like another whole new sort of experience for me.
Right. And what is the big, other than the money, is it the attitude? Is it the ethos?
Yeah, look, I think the resources is the biggest thing, and it's hard to sort of understate, because it's not just in terms of like money to make car parts. It's the facilities you have in the factory and the time off, like at Red Bull now, the race team are really lucky. So in between events, we come home and we might have to do like a half day in the factory, but the rest of the week we have off. At Marussia, that really wasn't, you'd get back and you'd be lucky if you got one day off before you were off, you were back away racing, because, the factory, they didn't have the support staff required to re-prep the cars and give you that time. So the resources was like the biggest thing. In terms of attitude, I guess it's sort of a two-way street, like when people are given all the tools they need to succeed, their sort of desire to make it happen grows with it. I think that at Marussia, it wasn't that there was a lack of desire, it was more that the lack of resources sort of eventually it becomes like this obvious thing, we're working as hard as everybody else in the pit lane, but we've got really very little chance of winning. And it sort of becomes, it just becomes a bit of a vicious cycle in that sense.
I know you talked about like the resources, obviously you have that, but then I think, how much when you have, maybe a guy like Max, who you just think like, hey, especially this year, times in 2021, where it's like, if we give him a chance to win, he's gonna win. Is kind of a little. How much of a motivating factor is that for you?
No, I mean that's absolute, like, it's probably one of the biggest things. Certainly in 2024, like I always felt that with Max, if you give him 90% of the car he needs, he'll find the rest. And certainly, that sort of proved out in 2024. There was a lot of that season where we really didn't have the fastest car, but Max will always find the result that he needed, And you sort of look back at it, much like we used to call Alan Prost. the professor. Max would find a way to get exactly just what he needed from that race in order to keep it going. And yeah, look, that's a real skill on his part. But yeah, in terms of the motivation for us, it's huge. You know, someone that driven, that talented, that much fire in them, it certainly brings the best out of everyone in the garage as well.
And you guys, I mean, mechanics are you kind of have this horrible job where, for the most part, unless you do like some crazy pit stop, nobody notices mechanics unless you guys like really fuck up.
Yeah, like.
But I was wondering, like, you know, Max had this drive in Brazil that was just like insane, and it was like, oh my god, this guy is the best at what he does. Like, what is like your guys' Brazil 2024, where like we don't necessarily know, but you're like, whoa, that was.
I mean, to be fair,
we just dunked from the free throw line. There. You know what I'm saying?
To be fair, it is something like Brazil. Like, you know, like you said, mechanics, they're often unsung heroes in the sport.
Right.
You know, like ultimately all of the work that they do is what enables the car to go out there and win, right?
Right.
Obviously, I've always said the pit lane is sort of one of the places the mechanics get to shine. It was one of the things that motivated me to want to get into the sport. You know, it was always wanting to be able to go and do F1 pit stops. I think they're incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, ultimately we understand that role for ourselves, you know, but a result like Brazil, it feels just the same for us, you know. All of those weeks are tough. Certainly the weeks where you have, you know, tough times with the car. So when you've had weeks where you've had mechanical issues, things aren't going right, or even weeks where, you know, pit stop practice has been a bit off all week and nothing sort of feels like it's falling into place. Those can be the results on Sunday. You know, you come across the line with a win on Sunday. Those ones can feel like the most important to you. You know, anytime you feel like you've sort of really triumphed against adversity, whether it be out on track or in the garage, those are the ones that really mean the most.
What sets the Red Bull pit crew apart? Because, you know, sometimes we've up and down the paddock, there'll be varying degrees. And even, you know, at times where other teams like kind of catch up, Red Bull is always either at the top or right there. There's like what kind of, because I know that, you know, I've heard you, I can't remember if I read it in your book or I heard you talk about it, that like, you know, the pit stop's in there, but it's really like a secondary portion of the job. Like you setting up the power unit is kind of like, that's the main part of the job. And then, we also got to do the pit stops. It's not, you know, in NASCAR, they've got these just like ex-NFL players and D1 college football players who are just like, all they do is the pit stops. But for you guys, it's like just another part of the job.
Yeah, that's like a mechanic's dream in F1, really. If you could just like fly in on a Sunday morning, do pit stops and then bounce, that would be like the ideal. But yeah, as you say, it's sort of a secondary part of our job. What I guess, look, it's been 7 years of winning the DHL Fastest Pit Stop Award. And I guess ultimately it's just down to consistency. For us as a crew, it's something that personally we're all really passionate about. You know, it's not like a part of the job that's like, oh, we have to be good at this. It's a part of the job where like we all want to be the best at this. And I think that's part of it, but I think there's also a great deal of understanding among the crew that not every pit stop is going to go right. You know, so when we have bad ones, I think we're particularly good at sort of picking ourselves back up and getting on with the next one. And then I think the second part of it is just that we're all there to support one another. Like, there's no good, like, for me, you know, in my position and my role in the pit crew, it's all very well me going, oh, well, I'm the fastest of what I do, but I need to pick my teammates up because really, you know, it takes all of you to be on that same level. So supporting one another in sort of making things work is probably the thing that we're best at, and that's probably what's helped us to sort of win the award over the last 7 years. But yeah, also it's, you know, for us, there's an understanding that it's not necessarily about doing the very fastest pit stop. Ultimately, you know, you can go and do a 1.8 second pit stop if your next two are 3.6, 3.7 seconds because you're trying so hard to go fast that you make mistakes, then you know, it's no good to anyone.
Well, I know you're not exactly telling the truth because in your book you say that you look at the analytics and you figure out, okay, which wheel was fastest, and you
for sure.
you gloat on the WhatsApp. So, and that sort of helps push you guys along too. And I want to ask you about this. So like, you know, how on the limit are you when you go for a pit stop? because if drivers, they talk about like, okay, if I try to go as fast as possible, I could go faster, but I risk a crash. Sounds like you could go for the 1.8 every time, but you might screw it up and get a 4 or 5 second. How on the limit are you every time? And does that change based on like in 2023, you could be like, well, I could take my time with this one, right? It's sort of situation. Is that sort of situational, or are you guys going 99% every time? What is kind of your approach to, or is it situational?
I mean, I think you're right. In some ways, it probably is situational, but it's not like a conscious thing. You know, it's not like something we go out there and goes, right, guys, we'll just do this at 80%. But I think that there will always be that little thing. And like you said, we're all super competitive. And we sort of use that to drive each other on. You know, that sort of internal competition is really important to us. But yeah, look, I wouldn't say to you that every single pit stop, especially the ones where you know it's important or sort of it could be a race changer if it goes wrong. I'm not going to tell you out there I'm giving it 101%. You know, if I can do a consistent stop and the car leaves the box in 2.1 seconds and I can do that at 80%, then it's the sensible choice. You know, like I said, over the course of a season, and even just in any individual race, if your strategy engineers can sort of say, well, I know that the crew are going to consistently deliver 2.3, 2.7, 2.4 second stops, then I can plan around that. You know, if you have a pit crew where you don't know if the stop's going to be 1.8 seconds or 5.6 seconds, obviously it makes that part of the job a lot harder. So for us, it's just about maintaining a rhythm and a comfortable pace that you can consistently do good stops at.
Mm-hmm. Vankas, specifically the male Vankas who listen and watch this pod, when you leave the house, it's phone, wallet, keys, and now, how does my hair look? But if you're experiencing hair loss, you may not be so confident when you step outside the door, and it's time to get that confidence back and restore your hair with Hims. Hims provides you with convenient and quality access to a range of hair loss treatments that work from the comfort of your couch. Hims makes treating hair loss simple with doctor-trusted options and clinically proven ingredients like finasteride and minoxidil that can regrow your hair in as little as 3 to 6 months. Choose from your personalized chewable, oral, spray, and serum treatments to find what works best for you. The process is simple and 100% online. There's no uncomfortable doctor visits. You know, that can be a little bit awkward. You just do it online and you get it done. You can start your free online visit today at hims.com/redflags. That's HIMS.com/redflags for your personalized hair loss treatment options. Once again, that's hims.com/redflags. Results may vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. This episode is brought to you by Southern Comfort. With a one-of-a-kind blend of fruit and spices, SoCo whiskey is the original ready-for-anything spirit. Satisfying on its own and ideal in any mixed drink, Southern Comfort is easy to enjoy however you drink it and whoever you drink it with. We think SoCo can go with everything, but you be the judge. Find your comfort zone and try out a cocktail today. Some opinions, what you can try. These are the ones that I personally enjoy. SoCo with lemonade. Woo! Get that little bit of sour with the sweet and a little bit of that punch. Delicious. SoCo with orange juice if you want full sweetness hitting your gullet. Or, of course, classic SoCo Cola. Mix it with your Coca-Cola or your Pepsi, or keep it Pepsi Zero or Coke Zero to keep it tight, dude. Okay, no matter what the moment, Southern Comfort is ready for anything, packed with flavor, mixes with anything, and easy to drink. We challenge all of you out here to find your comfort zone. Try out some Southern Comfort mixed drinks and send us your favorites. We'll shout out the best ones on a future pod. Pick up some Southern Comfort today, Vankas. Now back to the show. What's, you talk in the book, you know, about the time you dropped the wrench in Ricardo's car.
Yeah.
You know, what are like, if things like that go wrong? I mean, that worked out for you in the end. It was like, you know,
I got lucky that day.
Yeah. I mean, you could talk a little bit about that. I'm just curious, like, what are the, times where a thing goes wrong or a wheel nut gets dropped or like kind of just the human error, aspect. That's something that I think, that we love about F1 is that it's like, it's the pinnacle of motorsport. It's the top of the, it's these indestructible, it's these in computers and in the wind tunnel. And then it's just, everyday people, flesh and bones, who make mistakes, dropping wrenches.
Yeah, for sure. And I tell you what, last year there was, I can't remember what race it was at, but we were all a little bit tired. And obviously we have cameras in our garage, and I think it was on a Thursday or something. We were just getting ready to take the car down and weigh it or something like that. And all my colleagues were watching me, and no one said anything because I struggled to try and put a rear wheel on a front axle. And I'm there for ages, like I'm not really obviously paying enough attention. I'm there like trying to get this, why won't this wheel nut do up? And then I look up and all my colleagues are just giggling to themselves, and now they've got this wonderful bit of camera footage of me stood there trying to get this rear wheel to go on a front axle. So these kind of things, they do happen. I guess it's about when they happen, but it's not, it'd be ridiculous to think that technicians in F1 don't make mistakes. They happen quite often. It's just about A, having the processes in there to catch them, and B, like I have this thing, like I can make any mistake, but I'll only make each mistake once.
Do you get tired? Are you like having a long day and you're tired, and then you like watch, Williams' situation and their mechanics, and you're like, I feel better now, actually?
It's probably not as harsh as, I feel better now, but certainly there have been times where you look up and down the pit lane and you'd be like, I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
Like certainly, obviously, you're not watching it on TV, but there's a couple of where they scramble all night to get his car ready for Saturday. They're up all night because they wrecked it on Friday, and then he just wrecks it again. Or they work all night Saturday to get ready on Sunday, and they've done a couple of shots of of one of these mechanics, and he just looks like dead inside. Yeah. And I'm like, damn, that must be the worst job in the world.
Yeah, mate. And look, these bad days happen, and look, I talking about Brazil last year is obviously the one that stands out. And we shared a hotel with the Williams mechanics, and we see them at the end of the day, and we're like, sorry you're going through it.
Yeah.
In some ways you kind of wish you might be able to give them a hand, but yeah, like I said, that is just something you get used to as a part of racing. Like the good days, hopefully you get more of them than bad, and certainly for me, I've been lucky enough to have had more good than bad. But yeah, it doesn't always go the way you want it, and unfortunately it's rough with the smooth.
Well, I'm curious about the grind, because even though you say I've had more good days than bad, you've had in a lot of ways a really great situation in the last few years, but it's still such a grind, and you talk about that in your book to the point. It was a tough moment for you, but you at one point you're in your bathroom and you're crying listening to Adele. That's
for sure, man.
F1 will break you in that way. Can you tell that story? Because that was
Adele will do that to anybody. But anyway,
I mean, it was it was one of those sort of things. I probably up until 2021, I'd never really considered, like, obviously it's always been a physical job. It's always been physically draining. I probably never considered how much it can really take its toll on you mentally. Especially look, you're competing at the sharp end of a very competitive sport. And yeah, 2021, I remember it just slowly creeping up on me, to the point where we were getting back from races, sort of at the end of that season, we were coming back from races, and the week would just fly by, and before you knew it, you were back on a plane. You didn't feel rested at all. You were still carrying all the stresses of the last weekend and all the work that's going into trying to win. And yeah, I remember in Qatar that year, just sort of one morning getting up as ever. I didn't even, I started my day. I didn't even think there was anything wrong, or getting on with it, getting ready to go to work. And Adele had just dropped 30. And I put that on, and I was just getting ready. And I remember, these triple headers, one of the hardest things for me is I miss my daughter. Like, I miss her so much when I'm away for that kind of period of time. And I remember halfway through, I was just stood there brushing my teeth in the mirror, and My Little Love was playing. And as I was listening to this song, it just fucking broke me for a minute, And I took a little minute and sat down and sort of said to myself, what on earth am I putting myself through here? And look, again, it's another situation. I was really lucky to have sort of the team around me that I did. I got in the van and went to work and said to the boys, look, don't listen to that Adele album until you get home because it's going to do you in. It's going to get you. And, we talked about the stresses and everybody sort of, that kind of open conversation and being able to say to your colleagues, like, boys, I'm having a rough day today, And thankfully, just having the people around you to sort of pick you up when you need them was really important.
How much do you think there is a discussion around the demands of it, and the sport's only getting more popular. They're only making more and more money. We're going on 24, 25. It's like, the amount of time away, there is a breaking point. I think especially, Max gets to fly in his private jet from place to place and have whatever. And, we when we go to Austin, we're like in the, we're in the TSA line, with the guys and the girls in the garage. And, there's that aspect of it. I mean, you've talked a lot about, being away from your family and that you hope that it's worth it. But, I'm curious your thoughts on kind of the sport seems to be just pushing more and more and more and more and more. But at what point was there a breaking point between, people are just going to have to take races off, that people still have to do these jobs, and there comes to a point where it's too much?
Yeah, ultimately, look, I think you're right. There will come a point where all teams in the paddock are going to have to sort of say, look, we need to have a rotation of staff to some extent and allow staff some sort of respite because, yeah, like you said, you can do 1, 2, maybe even 3 seasons of this 24 races, but sustainable, it's not sustainable over a decade, for example. I wouldn't have been doing this for this long if I'd been doing 24 races from the beginning. It's simply not sustainable. But at the same time, there are plenty of people, like, depending on where you're at in your career, where you might say, well, actually, this kind of lifestyle really suits me, and then some people where it doesn't. So firstly, I'm not into, because somebody asked me this the other day about sort of mandating time away and things like that. And I'm not really into that kind of stuff. I'm not into over-regulation, but I would like to make sure that, teams are giving staff the opportunity to take that time if they need it. I think the bigger thing is, certainly for trackside personnel is, with salaries currently being an in-cap cost, ultimately what you're seeing is a lot of people, talented people seeing a ceiling on what they can earn in F1. It's sort of my biggest gripe about the cost cap is not necessarily that it's not good to level the playing field. I'm all for that. But I think at the moment, what we have with the financial regulations is where the calendar keeps increasing. So for those traveling personnel, you are adding more and more physical work. Every time you add an event, this is more time they will spend away from their families. And I think that at the moment, there's a bit of an imbalance because you still have a cost cap where there's only so much that teams are going to be able to pay these people. Yet each year, we're going to keep asking them to do more and more for it. So I think that we need some sort of solution. And I think we need it pretty quickly because, we're reaching a point where ultimately the money that's on offer for this work isn't really going to cut it.
Calum, so we don't just point out problems on this podcast. We find solutions. If you were the head of the FIA, maybe that position's opening up soon. Who knows? If you were the head of the FIA, what would you do? Like, what rules would you change? Especially put the tear-offs in the car. How many tear-offs do you guys have to pull out of the cars? Why don't they just put it in the cockpit? Anyway, I
wouldn't be surprised if a lot of that's the old tactical tear-off. You've got a guy chasing you down.
Banana peel, Mario Kart.
Pretty much.
Exactly.
Look, I think if I was in a position to sort of make those kind of decisions, I think the financial regulations would be the most important one for me. And like you said, I don't like to pose problems without solutions. And I think that there is a solution. I think that whilst we do need to sort of keep restraints on how teams can spend their resources and keep the competition a level playing field, I think that we need to do it without punishing the lowest earning workers. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is something that was introduced in the paddock a long time ago, which is an operational personnel limit. So I don't know if you're aware, but sort of from Wednesday through to the start of the race, teams are limited by how many operational personnel they can have in the paddock. Prior to these rules, the teams with more money, they'd just send people to do day shifts, night shifts, work all hours, whatever. And then the FIA said, well, look, firstly, it's dangerous to have people working very long hours on race cars where they're safety critical jobs. But also, I think if we thought about, rather than restricting people's salaries, we simply said to teams, you can have this many people working in this area, this many people, depending on the activities of your company. I think that would be a better way to maintain a meritocracy, because teams then, they don't have the spare capacity or personnel limit to have jobs that aren't needed. But that way as well, they know that they're going to employ the best people for these jobs, and they can earn what they're worth. I think there are other solutions as well. I think, we look at the cost of living crisis and we can say, well, maybe we need to make an allowance for teams to increase wages in line with that, inflation or cost of living, whatever we want to do. But I think actually a much simpler solution was just say teams, well, these are the resources you're allowed to use. You're allowed to have this many people working on these projects, and you have to best allocate those resources. I think that would be a much better way to deal with it, because then you do have a level playing field. Teams can say, well, we want to allocate these many people to this project or this project or this project or whatever. But at the same time, you've got people who, we say that Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsport engineering. People can debate about the racing and whatever, and, that's fine. But I think if as a sport, we can say that for a mechanic or for an engineer or technician, Formula One is the pinnacle, then ultimately you have to be prepared to pay these highly skilled people what they're worth. And, I'm not the first person to sort of talk about this. Adrian Newey said it a long time ago. He said, we are dangerously approaching a place where you can earn more going and doing WEC or IMSA, going and being contracted doing other motorsport series. And if we go too far down that road where the best people aren't working in Formula One anymore, then how do we say that this is still the pinnacle? So I think that given the opportunity to make change, that would be where my first focus was. It certainly wouldn't be things like trying to get people to stop swearing. I really wouldn't be that concerned about that. Yeah, I'd rather make sure that they were earning what they should.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We certainly agree. That's why we swear so much on this podcast.
Is that why? Is that you just want to make sure?
It's a form of protest.
We stand in solidarity with Yuki. We stand in solidarity with Yuki Tsunoda and Max Verstappen. That's
I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Bankers, this episode is brought to you by Everyman Jack. Listen, when I go out into these streets of New York City, I want to be feeling and smelling my best. All of a sudden, people will sometimes, rarely recognize me. And the last thing that I want is they say, look, I met the guy from the Red Flags, and guess what? He smells like crap. But with Everyman Jack, I don't have to worry about that. Everyman Jack is the clean men's care brand made specifically for guys. And I listen when I say clean, because Everyman Jack has naturally derived ingredients. So many of these things out there, you don't know. You read it, you go, what the hell is even that? Like the meme. But with Everyman Jack, it's all naturally derived ingredients, from body wash to deodorant, hair to beard care. They've got everything you need to look, smell, and feel great without breaking the bank. This stuff is affordable. And here's why they stand out. Every product is made naturally derived ingredients. So I said earlier, no harsh chemicals. You're not putting any junk on your body. Most guys don't realize what's in their body wash or deodorant. Everyman Jack makes it easy to clean up your routine. Also, it smells great. The scents are designed for guys. Think manly and outdoorsy, sandalwood, cedar, coconut, vanilla. My personal fave, because I like a little bit of sweetness on my smell. And even new ones like mountain air, so that I can pretend to be outdoorsy even though I live in New York City and actually have never seen a tree. The best part, it's affordable, so you don't need to drop $15 on a body wash. You can get everything for under $10 with Everyman Jack. This is the first men's personal care brand you don't have to compromise on price, scent, or quality. Give Everyman Jack a shot today and head to Walmart, Target, or Amazon to pick up your next body wash and stick of deodorant. Try Everyman Jack today at www.everymanjack.com.
Superstardom? Should we talk his superstardom?
Yeah, I want to talk. I want to talk. Also like kind of the the fun side of it. You've won 4 championships these last 4 years. I'm curious, what's been the best party these last 4 years? Like, what's been the best celebration? Was it Abu Dhabi 2021 or was it, 2023? What's been like the pinnacle party?
I tell you what, it tends to be like the location rather than the occasion.
Okay.
So like depending on where you are tends to dictate how good a night out you can have. So certainly Mexico in the past has always been some incredible nights out. Often, like Red Bull Mexico, they throw a great party. The team are lucky to have partners like Pitlane. So we certainly know how to throw a good party. We had a particularly good one in Canada last year, Montreal. That was a good night out.
You've had a few of those Patron like bottles that are with the straw through the top.
Yeah, quite a few. Quite a few.
I've had a couple of those at some Red Bull events. Yeah.
No, it tends to be like location tends to be the sort of the defining thing, and also schedule. So like when we go somewhere where maybe we've got half a day off before we fly to the next race, people are obviously a lot more willing on a Sunday night to really go for it. Right. And that's when you end up, having to get people dressed and drag them through airports. And
I see. Who's the best in terms of drivers that you've worked with? Who's the most fun to party with?
Oh, mate! Again, you know what? Max knows how to have fun. Max certainly knows how to have fun. There was a night out that rings a bell a few years ago in Austin. That was quite a heavy one. I tell you what, Max's first win, Barcelona 2016. That was certainly the last time I ever drank Cafe Patron. I can't even stand the smell of it since then. But no, there's been good nights out. Danny Rick was always good for a night out as well. I've been quite lucky, there's been a lot of drivers throughout the Red Bull ranks. I guess it's part of the sort of way the company is, that they tend to be people who know how to have a good laugh.
Nice. And that I've heard you talk before that you actually kind of don't love the music choices in the Red Bull garage.
Do you know what it is? It's not that I don't like it. It's just that I have this weird thing. Like, I don't know how anyone can enjoy sort of tech house when they're not on drugs. Like, if you were like on drugs in a club, like I can perfectly understand why it might be enjoyable. But if you're at work trying to do your job, I just don't know how you can deal with that.
Yeah, but you like anything when you're on drugs. That's why you
like tech house, because
my girlfriend doesn't like Charlie XCX, and I'm like, well, if you were on Molly, you'd like her, and she was like, but when I'm on Molly, I like anything. You know what I mean? So,
all right, if you were gonna run the aux cord in the Red Bull garage, what would you have on?
Well, so I think it depends. So like for me, I started doing a thing last year, something that I called like Thoughtful Thursdays, right? So on a Thursday, when you're just in the garage all day, you're doing prep work, looking after spares. I don't need that. I don't need that all day, when it sounds like it's been the same song for like 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah.
So I started doing this thing called Thoughtful Thursdays, where you can put anything on, but it's got to be like soul, R&B, like something like classic, something that anyone can sing along to, like all the classics, all of that kind of stuff. And I don't want to hear anything above like 130 BPM until we get like well into the weekend.
Right.
And who controls the aux cord?
Basically, whoever gets to the stereo first in the morning. So a lot of the time it's our garage technicians, because like some days they tend to go in slightly earlier than the mechanics to sort of, whether it be turn the tires on, get them on heat, prep the garage for the day. So they tend to be there first. So they usually always get sort of first dibs on the radio.
Is there a particular person where you see him, you see his phone in there, and you're like, well, I'm fucked, man. This is gonna be a rough day.
Absolutely. If I see like hydraulics technician Luke Heath going towards the stereo, I know I'm about to put my AirPods in and put them on noise cancelling. That's basically how it goes. At any point that I see Luke going towards the stereo, I know it's over for me. It's finished. It's done.
Okay.
That's tough.
And are there like rivalries between like Max's car and Checo's car in terms of the mechanics?
No, not at all, actually. I mean, firstly, because like over the years, as people come and new people arrive, like there's been plenty of back and forth.
Yeah.
So I worked on Checo's car in his first year with the team. I didn't switch over to Max's until a technician left, and then I went across. And it's sort of it's kind of thing that, depending on what people are doing, like for example, the number one mechanic on Checo's car last year, he'd come from Max's car crew because he was a number two mechanic, and there was an opportunity for him to graduate into the next role. So it's very much a collaborative thing. People are going to swap back and forth as time passes. And also, when shit really hits the fan, you're going to need the other car crew's help. But at some point in the year.
Right.
And plenty of that happens, like if you're up against a deadline, things haven't gone right, people are very quick to jump over to the other side of the garage and help out wherever's needed. So it really is like one crew, essentially.
Yeah. That is not what happened with Nico and Lewis, I read. And they had to switch,
I heard
switch them because it got so bad between the two sides that they were like, okay, everybody's switching because it's like.
I think it is though? I think more than anything, it's sort of like, I think it's more like the public. There'll always be like these conspiracy theories that one crew is better than the other. Listen, there's nobody at that circuit racing that isn't the best at what they do. Like it's sort of an important thing to remember that it's not like, oh, there's a group of mechanics who aren't as good as the other. They're all there because they are the best at what they do. Right. And there's plenty of people behind them wanting those jobs as well. So it's not like there's any sort of difference in terms of the quality of the work. It really is.
Yeah. That's reserved for the drivers.
Yeah. On occasion. Yeah.
I mean, when Nicholas Latifi threw it into that barriers and then all of a sudden Max Verstappen wins the championship, that was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, what a guy. I've always thought that Nicholas Latifi was one of the best drivers that we'd seen in this paddock.
That's right.
Actually, having such a crucial contribution just goes to prove that.
A huge in the Hall.
Was that your favorite tire change ever? In that after that red flag, you were like, was that the best tire change you ever made?
It was actually, it was one of those lower pressure pit stops,
right?
Because under a safety car, ultimately, it'd have to go really, really wrong for it to sort of cause any sort of detrimental effect, but. Regardless of that, and there not necessarily being the same pressure to perform in that time, there was also this knowledge that this could be a pit stop that changes the outcome of the World Championship.
Yeah.
So, there's always going to be that internalized pressure, and it's one of those things I try and say that I almost try and switch my brain off when I go out into the pit lane. But in those circumstances, yes, it is very difficult to do so.
So this year's 2025. Coming up. You guys have had 4 years. Max won 4 championships in a row. You guys weren't able to nab the Constructors' Championship this year. What are your? I mean, it's closer than ever. It's there's 4 teams up at the top. What are your thoughts, hopes, expectations going into 2025?
I mean, hopes are always the same. I hope that we can build the best car, put it on pole and win every race. That's the hopes, always, without a doubt. I think realistically, I think we're in a position where we could have a very, very tight, championship, both the constructors and the drivers. I mean, if we make the assumption that, let's say, at least everybody starts the season where they finished off, then I think it's going to get very tight throughout the season. I think if teams have made sort of the small gains that you'd expect in certain areas, then look, potentially we could be looking at the kind of blockbuster season that even betters 2021. It could be certainly a fight between more than 2 drivers. You could be looking at 5 or 6 drivers that are in it.
When you so after you guys won in 2021, there was all this controversy, and watching in 2022, like you were watching Drive to Survive, and you see Christian come in there, and they're saying and he's like, man, they think we're illegitimate. He's like saying oh, and then Max is now pissed off. Everybody's pissed off. And 2022 was like, now we got to prove it. We got to prove it. Right. And then there was a narrative around 2022. And I was like, oh, he's taking the doubt around 2021 and using it as fuel. And that became the narrative of 2022. So it looked like, I mean, what do you think? What are you guys telling yourselves, you think, going into 2025? What's the narrative? Because when you're on top for so long,
in the engine,
when you're on top for so long, it's maybe harder to have the motivation.
Yeah, to sort of keep that drive. I hear what you're saying. I think in terms of sort of the personalities that we sort of have in the team, the sort of ethos that the team was built on, you're always going to have the driven people. It is just that kind of place. But in terms of sort of what we expect going into this year, it's one of those, I think there will have been a great deal of disappointment, obviously not being able to secure the constructors last year. And then I think the other sort of crucial thing is there's a great deal of anticipation of where we're going to sort of end up in 2026. Obviously for Red Bull Racing, it's a new PU. a venture out on their own, the first time that they will have actually sort of in-house produced their own engine. So I think that there's sort of with this season, there's sort of an opportunity to say, right, this is a year where we can grab ourselves and other drivers and other constructors, do everything right, and then sort of head into the unknown on a high. You know, I think that it'd be silly to say that, you know, Red Bull are like the underdogs going into 2026. You know, the first time you produced an F1 engine against some veteran manufacturers who are very used to it, you know, it's a very much an unknown for 2026. So I think that this year there'll be a real determination to sort of say, well, you know, this sort of last bit of this last era of these regulations, we want to come out on top. So I think that kind of drive's always going to be there. It's just in the nature of the people that work in the team. And you know, that's true throughout the pit lane. I don't think that really, like people in F1, people who work in F1, they're not wholly there for the money. Like, as I said, like mechanics, engineers, technicians, you can earn more money elsewhere. Every single one of them is there because they're a competitor and because they love racing. So you're always gonna find that motivation. And it's just about seeing where we come out with these cars, you know, at the beginning of the year. I think it's certainly going to be exciting to see where we're at. You know, I think we can expect McLaren to start the year as they finished, hopefully with, you know, a strong car. Red Bull will obviously been trying to cure some of the things that sort of plagued the RB20. And look, Ferrari with Charles and Lewis, I think that's going to be a relationship that everybody's super keen to see. I think, you know, we'll see a fired up Lewis. We'll see a Charles that's ready to sort of learn and push on with his new teammate. And yeah, it'd just be exciting to see where we pan out. I think for me, hopefully, and I always joke that 2023 was my favourite year because it was all so simple. But realistically, like, I love a challenge, and, you know, it's sort of the nature of everyone there. I think that they'll relish an opportunity to really go and fight tooth and nail through the whole season.
When do you feel like you'll have a sense of where? Do you feel like you already? You don't have to say where it is now, but do you feel like you already have a sense of like where Red Bull, where they're at with the offseason? Is it going to be like at testing? When are you gonna? You know, you're in the inner sanctum. When are you gonna find out like how Red Bull is?
I mean, mate, it's really hard to say because, you know, stable regulations from last year. The car, you know, doesn't look drastically different. You know, obviously, the DO have worked on really small areas where there'll be some changes, but it's hard to sort of look at your own car and go, oh, yeah, we're in it. You know, I did that for a long time between, you know, 2015 and 2020. Every year we'd start the year and I'd look at the car we'd built and go, oh, yeah, she looks racy. We're going to be fast this year. And then by race 4, Mercedes had absolutely spanked us. And we're sitting in the garage going, oh, well, at least we'll get second place. Do you know what I mean? So it's a really tough one. And I try not to sort of make these kind of predictions. And even preseason testing, like preseason testing is such a weird one because we'll go out and we'll run our program. You know, all of the things that engineering want to get through, they'll be working on so many different things. And it's often really hard to sort of look at lap times and what other teams are doing and sort of seeing where you're at in the fight. I think actually some of sort of the journalists and pundits get a better idea during testing because they get the opportunity to watch the car go through corners on the circuit. And you know, they can very quickly see a stable car or a car that's struggling in these areas. And they might have actually probably the better insight into it all. For us in the garage, you know, we can talk to our engineers about the numbers, but until you know what your competitors are doing, it's very difficult to make that kind of judgment. Race 1, qualifying, that's it. That's where you're at.
Yeah, I just want to ask him, you know, you spoke in your book about how you got into this because you wanted to be a mechanic, and then Drive to Survive comes along and you become this sort of breakout star. And talk us through how you sort of navigated becoming a bit of a breakout star, the sort of reasonings, you talk a lot about being sort of resistant to feeling tokenized, and then embracing, and then coming around to embrace that sort of position. It was like a very interesting arc that you talked about in your book, and I wanted you to maybe elaborate on.
Yeah, so look, I mean, it sort of began mostly actually with a bit of content that I did for Red Bull Racing, which was 60 seconds with, so like a day in the life of a PU technician in 60 seconds, sort of an outline of what I did. And the sort of public response to it was sort of really, like they loved the extra insight. I think Netflix gave the public a little bit of an insight into what goes on behind the scenes in Formula One, and they immediately wanted more, as you do, so once people started contacting me, like people had just started finding me on Instagram and contacting me saying, oh, I really love the sport. Could you talk to me about how you got into it? And it very much sort of started like that for me. And then again, with each season of Drive to Survive, then there were then more people messaging me, and a lot of people were saying, look, it's really great. I'm a young black mechanic. I never really thought about Formula One as a sort of career path for me. It's great to see you doing it. And then I sort of got to a point where so many people were sort of asking these bits of advice for me, and I very much wanted to try and offer them. Like, I felt like a lot of these people were probably trying to get these answers for ages, but they didn't have a resource that they could sort of turn to get information that they needed. So I felt that I was in a position where I could give it. And that was ultimately what led me to write Life in the Pit Lane, was that I was getting so many of these messages that it was impossible for me to reply to them all, but I wanted to offer this advice en masse. So, and I also felt like with a book, it's something that felt a lot more permanent, like we consume content at a very fast rate nowadays, so you can make content for socials and things like that. And I feel like, in 5 years' time, it's sort of forgotten about, or, even shorter period than that, people move on from your content so quickly. So I felt like by writing a book, I could sort of have this as a resource for people for a long time. And then sort of navigating it for me was difficult at times because firstly, like you said, there's always going to be this loud sort of view from some that say, oh, well, you're only popular because you're the only black mechanic. And to an extent, in the beginning, arguably, they were probably right. A lot of people sought me out because I stood out on Netflix and I stood out on their TVs when they were watching, Formula One. But what I sort of tried to do was make sure that it was worth it, if you like. Like, I felt like by offering people something that they weren't getting and they wanted, I could sort of earn this particular corner of, this little space. I could earn it and own it. And yeah, that's what I've been building on for the last few years. So it's sort of one of those things where I feel like I'm giving back. So it's great for me. I feel like for the team, it was a great thing for them to have voices that could deliver messages that were about the team, but in a less sort of corporate way. Like, corporate advertising is a really tough thing to conquer, and, real life stories and real voices become very important if you want to do a good job in it. So I felt like I was sort of doing something that would be great for the company, something that was great for me, and mostly just something that was great for fans of the sport and people who are really interested in racing careers.
Well, speaking of those fans, we do have some people that have written in some questions for you. This is from Andis92. Which Red Bull car has been your favorite?
Oh, RB19, without a doubt. Definitely the best car that we've ever built in Milton Keynes. Arguably, the greatest car that Formula One's seen. Like, in terms of its success and its statistics, RB19 was fantastic. Surprisingly, like, often when you have a really fast car like that, it can be a nightmare to build. But actually, for us in the garage, RB19 was pretty dreamy. It went together all right. It was reliable. There were no major issues throughout the year. So yeah, without a doubt, RB19, best car ever.
This is from Kyle Morsey. Where is the broken trophy now? Max's trophy from Hungary.
Yeah, that is in Milton Keynes. You can go and visit it in the reception. I think it's still there. It tends to sometimes broken? It moves around. Still broken. Beautiful. Still broken. It's there in its own little case. That's become part of the history of it now, that trophy.
Amazing. This is from Alessandra Yan08. What is your favorite moment of 2024?
It has to be Brazil. Like, Brazil for me, honestly, like I said already, it was a tough weekend. I was having a tough weekend as well because it was my daughter's birthday that weekend. So it'd been a rough one. Like, the whole weekend, it felt like everything was going against us. Like red flags, VSCs, just, it felt like people were throwing stuff at you. Like we said about Mario Kart, it was just one banana after another. So to come out of that race with a win and kind of feel like we've sort of made a point, that was a statement drive from Max, and obviously from all of us. It was a chaotic race with the red flags and all of that. So yeah, that one was sweet from 2024.
Did that even shock you guys? I mean, was Max even shocked by that? I mean, it's like he's starting from the back of the grid. I know it's raining, but it just felt impossible. And then he did it. Were you as blown away as we all were?
Do you know what? Normally, I never sort of try and predict where we're going to come out in races. But I think that with everything going on that weekend, there was just a sense in the garage that we were going to see something special. I remember talking to one of the other mechanics on the grid. I remember talking to the rear end mechanic while we stood there waiting in the rain, and I'm saying to him, Maz, I've got a good feeling about today. And actually, I think I said to him, I've got a funny feeling about today. And he said, good or bad? And I went, no, good. And then, yeah, it sort of all panned out. So I feel like sometimes you just get this tiny little feeling that this is the day where all of the rest of the week's bullshit is going to get ironed out.
What's the vibe like after a race like that? Because that was Lando was on his tail. It seemed like Lando was chipping away. And it seemed like that was a race where, if Max has a terrible race, Lando's up, near the top. Like if he can pull out a win, all of a sudden it's a whole other championship. And then Max just puts Max is just like, no, sit down, shut up, putting the team on his back and doing that and pulling that off. Like, what's the vibe what's the vibe in the garage after that?
I mean, it makes it really hard to pack up because, that's the kind of race where you kind of get the beers out as soon as the flag drops. And
right.
Unfortunately, you still got a car to strip and pack all into the air freight. And like Sundays are such a long day. Sundays are like a 14-hour day now at a racetrack. So it's difficult, but it does make it sweet. And it's, it's one of those days where the music really does go all the way to the 11 and the neighbors are annoyed and that's it. We're going for it.
Do you have like any big rivalries with other mechanics?
We all get on. I think it's one of those things. And I like to think that everyone is quite good. Certainly, I'm quite good at separating sort of what happens either side of the paddock. Like when I'm there and we'll compete, and if it comes down to it in the pit lane, we're really going to compete. But outside of that, we've all got to get along. We've got a long year ahead of us. I can't be having a beef with someone 2 races in, and then by race 12, I'm in a restaurant and we're strangling one another. Like I can't afford to be living like that.
Even in 2021 with Mercedes. We heard that there was some
it's gamesmanship. It's gamesmanship. Certainly,
West Side Story vibes, dude.
There's plenty of that goes on.
Yeah.
I mean, if Dan Engine Mode 11 is saying that the IT guys are eyeing each other up, then I gotta believe that there's some mechanics that are eyeing each other up.
I've never heard of this war of the IT technicians, but I'd quite like to see it. I think back in 2021 as well, we had Olaf as our sort of senior trackside technician, who was absolutely huge, South African. So it would have been interesting to see how the rest of the IT crowd would have gone up against him.
Right.
You ever think about like doing a tug of war, or like you ever do anything like outside the paddock games?
We've had plenty of sort of competitions over the years. I know like a few years ago they did like a big cycling competition. In Canada one year on the lake they did like rafting. I tend to participate in the golf tournament in Bahrain every year, but it's all quite sanitary, like nobody's out there. Nobody's out there having like real sort of competitions other than
right, because you're competing enough. Fun. It's not like me and Brian who like never compete and then get to compete one time and take it too far.
I don't know how you go about this life where you just don't compete in everything you do. Come on, guys.
Well, if you started a podcast, you'd see how competitive we were.
Yeah, we're competitive in our own way. What's the on the pit crew? What's the hardest job? What's the job that people do? I mean, the guy who has to do the front jack sometimes gets, messed up. Like, are there kind of jobs you're like, oh, when you start, you do that because no one wants that job? Like, what's the hierarchy of the?
Well, I mean, like the jobs that people sort of don't want tend to be obviously the hardest ones. And I can tell you from my point of view, there's the one job that I really wouldn't want to do on pit stops is rear jack. So like, I know you say about front jack and the car coming towards you, but at least the car's coming to you. And if you do get run over, you're going to get some paid time off of work. So it's silver linings, right? Silver linings. So you're going to get paid. You're going to go sit at home, watch the race on telly, and take the piss out of your teammates while they're packing up. It's not the end of the world. You're going to get a few weeks off. Rear jack for me is the toughest because you've got to chase the car. Like, you've got to let it come past you and then chase it. And the crash structure's only like that big and the jack's only like that big, and you've got to get it up in the air quickly. I'd say that's probably, like, from a skill level, that's probably one of the hardest jobs to get right and be really good at. I don't know what I'd say the easiest one is. Probably
it's the backup front jack.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair. Yeah. No. Yeah. Spare jack. Because by the time that you have to do anything, it's already gone, like, to shit. So it's fine, right?
Right.
Yeah. That does seem to be. That does.
Do you tease the backup front jack, man?
No, not at all. To be fair,
it's
like
no, he was talking to the real pit crew, not you.
Yeah, but at the same time, he doesn't have to stand around and do practice like 3 times a day or whatever. So, who's really winning here?
How many contingencies do you practice for? Because it's like, do you practice for, like, okay, if you get a 10-second penalty, all right, everybody freeze?
Pretty much.
Pretty much. Why is that one always slower?
Because it's to do with a lot of things. Like, obviously, you can't even touch the car until our little lights. So we have little blue lights that tell us. So we'll set a timer so that we know that we can't go basically until that light goes out. But it's not like when a car's coming in, you're not waiting for anything. As soon as I can see that wheel nut, I hit that wheel nut and undo it. By the time it's up in the air, the wheel's coming off. With everybody having to react to that light, it's, what's your reaction time going to be? That alone, it's going to be 3-4 tenths of a second. And then on top of that, it doesn't have the same rhythm. Like, the car's already static, so it doesn't have the same rhythm for everyone. So it's going to be a little bit slower. The driver reaction's going to be slower. So it really is a penalty having to do like a static stop. It will cost you more than what the penalty itself is. And also, it's really not worth being on the limit with that blue light because, a tenth of a second early, you touch that car, and now you're into a 10-second stop and go penalty. So there's really not a lot to gain.
That's the worst, when a guy touches it by accident.
Yeah, I know. And I can't imagine, like, you must feel like such a prick when that happens.
Yeah.
That's tough. All right.
I got a few questions.
Okay, go.
Okay, so this is just like a hypothetical question. Like, are you still keeping up with, like, regular cars?
A little bit. I try not to. I do a little bit. I'm very much a save the internal combustion engine car kind of guy.
Oh, really? Keep the gas flow. Keep the OG engines flowing.
Yeah, for sure.
So what would happen if, like, let's say a Toyota Camry, let's just say 2017, just hypothetically,
right?
just got your tires rotated,
right?
And then all of the sensors are off now. What happened? What would you suggest there?
I mean, the first thing is that, right, I'll tell you something now. This is a massively American thing, right? I don't know what the shape of your roads are, but I don't know anyone in the UK who goes to get their tires rotated. We just drive until they're worn out. Well, I don't really know, like, do you do more left-hand corners than right-hand corners? Like, or do you pretty much drive your car evenly and they're pretty much going to wear the same and you just replace them all when they need replacing? Like, tire rotation to me seems like something that's a made-up job.
I don't know. We were told, the proverbial we were told we needed to rotate our tires.
It sounds like something that, garages came up with as a way to get you in there. Like, it's a bit like Valentine's Day cards, It's like, oh yeah, you have to buy a card. Yeah, brilliant.
Oh, capitalism at play.
Okay, great. What are the biggest this is great. What are the biggest scams that mechanics pull?
There's that one. For starters.
I'm so glad I didn't fall for it.
Yeah.
I want to know what happened to your car. Oh, you said the sensors stopped working afterwards.
Right. And like, because it used to hypothetically show what your air pressure was, so you didn't have to go out and check. And now it's just like the car's like, where are your tires?
Yeah.
That's really strange, because I would have thought that they would have. I guess the sensors are probably calibrated for each corner. So if they've just moved the wheels around, then the sensors don't really understand. Like, they've got to talk to the receiver. That's the only thing that I can imagine's going on. Unless they like took your tires off the rims and rotated them around, and they might have just broken your sensors. That could happen.
I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment. So what do you think the biggest scams are, other than having your rotate? Like, what are like some big no-nos going into a mechanic shop?
Oh, mate, it's a tough one. You know what? I've experienced so many funny things over the years. Like, my grandmother took her car into a garage not long ago, a few years ago, to have her brake pads done. And she drove it for a little while, and then all of a sudden they were squeaking. And I looked and I was like, there's hardly any brake pad left, but it's only been like 3 months. And she took it back to the garage, and the garage tried to say to her that perhaps it was her driving and that she was braking too much. and I ended up sort of going back there with her and sort of explaining to them that I'm not a fucking idiot, and that I know that she's braking when she has to brake, and that brake pads should be lasting.
It's her driving style.
I'm like, what do you think she's doing? She's not doing the Dakar, you know. She's not out here doing rally stages. She's 70 years old. She's going shopping.
Yeah.
So you and what was did you strike fear into a mechanic's face? Yeah, I work in Formula One.
No, to be fair, I never ever try and run that shit on people. I just feel like it's like the most arrogant thing to do ever. However,
but when they're messing with your grandmother, I mean, come on.
Yeah,
I have a particular. You're like Liam Neeson. I have a certain set of skills.
I mean,
that will make me a nightmare for people like you.
I'll always just tell them that I'm a mechanic. I don't get into it. Like, I'll always just tell them that I'm a mechanic. But you know what? I was quite lucky. I had the last time I took my car into Audi, their workshop chief recognized me. So like they made sure they cleaned it all and did some bits that they didn't charge me for, which was quite a nice little touch.
Nice.
But now that Audi's entering, are they going to just spike your car now?
No, I'm sure they will.
They're going to put sugar in the engine?
Yeah, either that or I don't know. Maybe if they get discount on servicing for staff, then maybe I'll have to consider it.
Right.
There we go.
Yeah.
Well, we could talk to you all day, Matt. You know, Matt could talk to you about his car troubles. We would have to.
Not my car troubles. I'm just trying to keep him.
A friend.
If it was a red,
I'm just trying to keep him relevant.
Toyota Camry with a bunch of scratches on the side because his girlfriend only recently got. Yeah,
you should have got the Honda.
Yeah,
that's right. Should have got the Honda. That's right. I like it. Well, the book is great. Where can people get the book? It's coming out later this month.
Yeah, so the books are later this month. If you're over in the US, you can get it on Blackwell's or Amazon. Both of those links are in my bio at F1Mech on Instagram and Twitter. I'm still calling it Twitter. I'm not playing this silly game. But yeah, so yeah, the link in my bio is there for the book. It will be published on the 27th of Feb. Yeah, really excited about it all. Can't wait for everyone to sort of read it and see what the world thinks about what I have to say about life on the road.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of questions people had about, how your journey, and we got into it briefly there. But if you really want to know about, the full journey, then go pick up that book, February 27th. And could you honor us? We start the podcast with a What's Up Vankas, which is tribute to Gunther Steiner, who we see right there. Could you honor us with a goodbye Vankas?
Yeah, absolutely. In honor of Gunther, of course. Goodbye, Vankas.
Yeah, that was a good one. All right, yeah.
That was great. Goodbye, Vankas.
Goodbye, Vankas.